Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something a little different. You guys have sent us some articles and videos about popcorn and taxes in India.
Hmm.
And there seems to be, a lot of buzz, even some anger around how the Indian government is applying its goods and services tax,
Right.
or GST, to popcorn.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how a simple snack, something as ubiquitous as popcorn, can trigger such a big debate.
Yeah.
And it really highlights how those kind of like nitty-gritty details of economic policy can actually have a pretty significant impact
Yeah?
on people's lives and kind of touch on some sensitive nerves.
Right. You don't eat popcorn, right? It's
Yeah.
like the staple.
yeah.
You go to the movie theater, it's like a popular snack.
Yeah.
But suddenly it's like this symbol of, a really complex and maybe even like kind of a frustrating tax system.
Exactly. So for those who might not be super familiar with this, GST was rolled out in India back in 2017
Okay.
with this big goal of creating a unified tax system across the entire country.
Okay.
The slogan they used was "One Nation, One Tax."
Oh, I see.
And the whole idea was to simplify things, make interstate trade a lot smoother, a lot easier.
Okay, so one tax, one nation. That makes sense. But then I'm looking at these articles, and I'm seeing that there's actually a three-tiered GST structure for popcorn. So can you kind of break that down for us? Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, so it's not quite as simple as just one tax in practice.
Right.
The three different tiers, they depend on how the popcorn is actually made.
Okay.
So the simplest kind, you just got your plain popcorn with a little salt or spices maybe. That's taxed at 5%.
Okay.
But then you step up, you get to your prepackaged, like name brand popcorn.
Yeah.
That jumps up to 12%.
Okay.
And then for the real fancy stuff, caramel popcorn.
Uh-huh.
That hits a whole 18%.
Wow. 18% for caramel popcorn.
Uh,
That's like a pretty big tax for, just a snack.
right.
And I'm reading here some quotes in these articles from Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman.
Mhm.
And she's saying that, that higher rate for caramel popcorn, it's because of the added sugar.
Yeah,
It kind of puts it in a different category, more like, a sugary confectionery.
right.
But still, I got to ask, how does this whole thing square with, this idea of one nation, one tax?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that gets to the heart of a lot of the criticisms that people are aiming at GST in general. Because on the surface, it does seem like a bit of a contradiction to the initial promise, right? This idea of simplification. One tax fits all.
And it's not even just about, the tax rate itself, right? It's like this seemingly small thing, this popcorn thing,
Yeah.
is connecting to much bigger issues about how GST is being implemented and whether it's actually working the way it was supposed to.
You got it.
Yeah.
Exactly. There are these broader concerns, right, about fairness, transparency, and the impact of this tax on all these different parts of the economy,
Okay.
different groups of people.
So let's zoom back in on the popcorns for a sec.
Mm-hmm.
You're at the movies, you buy a big tub of that loose popcorn they, scoop out of the giant bin. What's the GST on that?
So that would be under that 5% rate, the same as if you bought popcorn at a restaurant.
Okay.
But here's the thing, there's a little twist. If the theater bundles that same popcorn with your movie ticket as part of a combo deal, then it actually gets taxed at the ticket rate. And ticket rates can vary a lot.
So it's the same popcorn made the same way, but it can be taxed at two different rates depending on how you buy it. That's kind of confusing.
It is. And I think that confusion is really fueling some of the backlash that we're seeing. People are going online, venting on social media, expressing their frustration. A lot of it with humor, which is interesting. There are all these memes going around, people bowing down to the finance minister, with bags of popcorn, offerings.
Right.
Jokes about popcorn becoming this luxury item.
Oh, yeah. I even saw a viral post that was telling people to leave India because of these kinds of regulations. It seems like for a lot of people, it's not even really about the popcorn. It's about this feeling that the whole tax system is just way too complex.
Yeah.
And maybe even a little bit random or arbitrary.
Right. And it's important to remember this isn't happening in a vacuum. India's got some pretty serious stuff going on right now.
Yeah.
Like that horrific rape case in Kolkata, which is, totally understandable why people are outraged and demanding action.
Yeah.
And, rising unemployment's a huge issue. It affects people's ability to, earn a living and the whole health of the economy.
Right. So in that context, it's kind of understandable why people are looking at this and saying, hold on, what are the priorities here? They see these really pressing problems and, we're having these debates about the finer points points of popcorn taxes?
Exactly. It raises a big question. Is this like the best way to use resources right now, focusing on these, micro level tax policies,
Hmm.
especially when there are these like much bigger problems to solve?
Yeah.
And it also makes people wonder, is GST really doing what it was supposed to do?
Yeah.
Is it actually simplifying things?
You mentioned earlier, like, concerns about the impact of GST on different industries, different sectors of the economy.
Mm,
Are there other industries that are facing, like, similar challenges to this whole popcorn situation?
absolutely. The online gaming industry is a big one. They're looking at a proposed 28% GST on all online gaming, regardless of whether it's like a skill-based game or chance.
Oh, wow.
So, a game of chess would be taxed the same as like a slot machine.
Yeah.
And that's stirred up a lot of debate and concern within that industry.
Yeah. That does seem like, a pretty steep tax, especially for a sector that's growing so quickly.
Right.
And, it has the potential to add a lot to the economy. Are people worried that this could backfire in some way?
There's definitely concern. Some experts are saying this high tax rate could actually drive users' way to offshore platforms.
Mm.
It could discourage investment, and in the long run, it could actually hurt the businesses that are playing by the rules.
It sounds like the government's trying to, walk a tightrope here, like balancing the need for tax revenue with the potential for, kind of clamping down on economic growth.
Yeah, it is a delicate balance. And it's not just about online gaming either. There are broader concerns about how GST is affecting the middle class and their ability to, afford things.
Can you say more about that? How's GST hitting the middle class specifically?
Well, one of the big criticisms is that GST can drive up prices
Okay.
for goods and services, especially the essential stuff that everyone needs. And when prices go up faster than wages do, people's purchasing power takes a hit.
So basically, they can buy less stuff with the same amount of money, which, I mean, that can really impact people's quality of life.
Yeah. Exactly. And that can have like a ripple effect on the whole economy.
Right.
When people have less money to spend, demand goes down, and that can slow down economic growth overall.
It feels like we've just started to, like, scratch the surface here, this whole popcorn tax,
Mhm.
which, at first I was like, what are we even talking about this for?
Mhm.
But now I'm seeing how it's this, like, this weird little window into the craziness of India's tax system
Mm.
and, like, the challenges of trying to do this huge tax reform and all the debates about whether it's fair, whether it's actually working, and who it's impacting.
Yeah, it's a great example of how sometimes the little things, the stuff that seems kind of insignificant at first, can reveal a lot about these bigger systems
Yeah.
and, get people talking about important things
Right.
that they might not have been thinking about otherwise.
And it shows, like, how important it is to stay informed about these things and get involved in these conversations. Because these policies, they affect all of us. And it's through, having these open discussions, these thoughtful debates, that we can work towards creating a system that's, fair, efficient, and actually helps everyone.
Absolutely. And it's also important to remember that all of these seemingly different issues, like the popcorn tax, the Kolkata rape case, rising unemployment, they're all connected in these complex ways. So when you're trying to tackle one problem, you got to think about how it affects everything else.
Right.
And you need policies that take a more holistic approach.
That's such a good point. It's not about, like, picking and choosing which issue matters more.
Right.
It's about seeing how they all fit together and trying to find solutions that get at the root of these challenges. But for now, let's get back to GST specifically
Okay.
and see how it's playing out in different situations.
Yeah, I'm ready to dig in. There are some other really interesting examples that can help shed some light on this whole thing.
Great. Let's keep going with this deep dive. I'm really curious to hear more.
Okay. So, we were talking about how those little things can reveal these bigger trends. And it made me think about, how GST revenue now goes to the state where the goods are actually consumed, not where they're produced.
Right. Right. And some of those producer states are feeling a little, well, left out.
Yeah.
Like they're missing out.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like this tension between producer states and consumer states. So think about this. A company's making potato chips in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, big producer of snacks.
Okay.
Those chips are then shipped all the way to Patna in Bihar to be sold. Under GST, the tax revenue goes to BR, even though, Tamil Nadu is the one that put in the resources, the infrastructure to actually make those chips.
So Tamil Nadu's putting in the work, but BR is getting the reward.
Yeah.
That does seem a little, I don't know, off.
And that's exactly the argument that some economists are making. Tamil Nadu, for example, figures it's losing like millions in revenue every year because of this setup. And the worry is that this could like discourage investment in manufacturing in those producer states, which could then, have a knock-on effect on the whole economy.
Okay, so we see how this popcorn tax, like, links up to this bigger debate about interstate trade. Like, where does the money actually go? But are there any economists who are actually in favor of this shift? I mean, there's got to be another side to this, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There are definitely economists who say that this shift could actually be a good thing for the Indian economy in the long run. The thinking is that it kind of pushes states to like focus on attracting businesses, attracting consumers. It makes things more competitive.
So it's like states are being encouraged to like create a better environment for business, improve their infrastructure to get more companies and consumers in, which in theory could lead to like more economic activity overall.
Exactly. But there are also economists who are like waving red flags here saying this could make those regional disparities even worse, lead to even more imbalance. Because if those producer states lose revenue, they lose investment, they might fall behind, right? While the consumer states, they just keep pulling ahead.
Sounds like a really complicated issue with good points on both sides.
It really is. And it shows how GST, it was meant to make things simpler, but it's also introduced all these new like complexities and challenges.
It reminds me of something you said earlier about, digital payments companies being asked to pay GST on like these smaller transactions.
Yeah.
That seems like another example of how like trying to apply GST to a sector that's changing so fast can lead to like a lot of confusion and stuff that nobody really intended.
Yeah, totally. Digital payments are booming in India. Companies like BillDesk and Seek Avenue, they're processing millions of transactions every single day. And the government's trying to figure out, okay, how do we apply GST to this whole new world? And it's definitely causing some friction.
I read in one of these articles that they're being asked to pay GST on transactions under 2,000 days. Even though, like back in 2016, there was this notification that seemed to say they didn't have to.
Right. And that's where a lot of the uncertainty and the frustration comes in because these businesses, they're stuck. They're being asked to pay taxes they don't think they owe. And it feeds into this feeling that, GST implementation, it can be unpredictable. It can be kind of inconsistent.
It's like the government's always playing catch up,
Yeah.
trying to adapt GST to all these new technologies and new ways of doing business. But while they're figuring it out, the businesses are the ones who are caught in the middle.
Exactly. And this brings us back to what we talked about before. Stability and predictability in a tax system, it matters. If businesses don't know what the rules are, or if they think those rules might suddenly change, they're going to be really hesitant to invest and grow. And that ultimately hurts the whole economy.
So how do we balance this? Like, how do we keep up with innovation and adapt the tax system to the way things are actually working, but also make sure it's fair, it's stable, and it doesn't, stifle all this economic growth?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It takes constant dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to like tweak things as you go. And it also really highlights how important transparency is, clear communication from the government. So businesses and individuals can understand how these policies actually affect them and make smart decisions.
With all this talk about GST, it's easy to forget about like the actual people this is impacting the most, everyday people. We've talked about the middle class, their buying power. But I'm wondering, how does GST affect people at different income levels? Are there specific issues for like lower income households?
That's a crucial point. It's so important to remember that GST, it doesn't hit everyone the same way. Lower income households, they often spend a bigger chunk of their income on essential things. And a lot of those things have GST on them. So even if the tax rate, looks the same on paper for everyone, the impact on their budget is way bigger.
Right, yeah. It hits them harder.
Absolutely. And that can have these like knock-on effects, right? Potentially push more people into poverty or make it harder for them to, get out of it.
Yeah, I see. So GST, I mean, it was supposed to like simplify the whole tax system, make it easier.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's way more complicated than that. Like there's all these unintended consequences.
For sure. Yeah.
And these debates about, how to make it actually work, make it fair.
It's complicated. You hit the nail on the head there. It's this complex system, lots of moving parts, affects people differently. And it's important to remember that as we're talking about it.
Yeah. It makes me think back to something you said earlier about like how these little things, like the tax on a bag of popcorn, can tell us so much about like these big systems. And and how they work. And they can start these really important conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like we shouldn't ignore those details.
Right.
Sometimes the best way to really wrap your head around something complicated is to zoom in on those specific, like, relatable things.
Right. Right. Because it's those real world examples that make all this economic stuff, make it make sense.
Totally.
Make it feel real for people.
It's those connections, right? Seeing how the little pieces fit into the big picture.
Yeah.
That helps you understand how complex these systems really are, and then you can start thinking critically about how they affect you.
Wow. This whole deep dive, it's been mind-blowing for me. I'll be honest. When we started talking about popcorn and taxes, I was kind of like, huh, what?
Right. Chuckles.
But now I see how this random topic has turned into this this crazy journey
Yeah.
into how India's economy works, the challenges of trying to do this, massive tax overhaul.
Yeah.
The debates about, fairness and whether it's actually working and who it's helping, who it's hurting.
It's been great unpacking all this with you.
Yeah.
It's these kinds of conversations, thoughtful analysis, open discussion that help us build a more informed public.
Absolutely. And to our listener out there, keep asking questions, keep digging, and don't be afraid to use those everyday things, those little details as starting points for your own, explorations. You never know what you might discover.
Until next time, keep diving deep.